Tonight, we're doing an introduction to Linux for the Sun City Center Computer Club. May, can't believe it's May already. And just as a side, 22 years past the 2000 computer scare. And I am Free John Kennedy. People know me as Free John because just about everything that I use on a computer is free. And also because we had in my club years ago a number of different Johns, so we all had to have our own little nickname. And I am a member of the East Central Technology Club. That's about 40 miles east of Columbus, Ohio. And as you heard, I am a part of the Speakers Bureau, which is why I'm here. I'm also the APCG regional advisor for regions 3 and 6, and that means starting in Kentucky up through Ohio and then westward across the Ohio River Valley and then over to Iowa and Nebraska up to Minnesota and Wisconsin. I have all the clubs that are up there. And of course, I always mention that this is brought to you because you are a member of APCUG. So you have one of these benefits of the membership. So what is Linux? And it's a short I, it's not Linux. It comes from a person whose name was Linus, but this is Linux. So Linux is actually just another operating system, that you can put on a computer. It's software that runs on hardware. It's free. It does the same thing that Windows does, who's made by Microsoft, and Mac OS, which is made by Apple. It works and acts just like your computer. You'll see that when we do the live demonstration. Linux is extremely secure due to the nature of how it works, which I might not talk about because that gets kind of deep. Linux is great because it works on new and old hardware, which I know is one of the concerns people are having with their current computers, because both Microsoft and Mac OS have lifetime that says if you've got an old computer, you can't run this, so you got to go out and buy a new one. With Linux, we have Linux versions that work great and keep an old computer going. Oh, and Linux is free. Linux offers unlimited choices and customization. You're not going to believe all of this is on here. It has an unbelievable amount of free software. I don't have to buy anything when I'm running Linux. Linux has many models and makes to choose from, and that's what kind of causes people some problems, because I have to tell you, Windows users, you don't have any choices. You come to the Linux world, you're going to have too many choices, but we'll help you narrow it down. And did I mention yet, the biggest thing about Linux is it's free. So Linux is not your one of a kind. There is only one version of Windows. There is only one version of Mac OS. Now, I'm not talking about going from XP7, whatever. Those are builds, really. But there's only one version of Windows and Mac, but their Linux is like cars with many versions. And it's the idea that we don't all drive the exact same car. So why should we all drive the exact same operating system? So cars have many makes, and this is how I introduce and explain the background for Linux. These aren't all of the manufacturers for cars, but these are a number of them. And as you can see, we've got 4 listed here: General Motors, Ford, Honda, Toyota, and there's Chrysler, and this and that, and VW, and there's a lot. And I added that the fact that Honda has its expensive version of Acura, and Toyota has their Lexus. But even when you look at General Motors, as I grew up, my family was a General Motors family, but they were an Oldsmobile family, because back in the days, General Motors had 5 different cars: Chevys, Pontiacs, Oldsmobile, Buick, Cadillac. And over time, General Motors says, you know, it's too much variety. So of course they got rid of the family car Oldsmobile, and then a few years ago they got rid of my Pontiacs. So we're down to here. But it was because I had a car one time. I had a Pontiac, a small subcompact, wasn't subcompact, but a compact car. And there were 5 different versions of that in the General Motors. Chevy had a version. Pontiac, the one I had, was called a Firebird, or a Fire something. And there was 5 different ones. And even the Cadillac had an identical car, only fancied up, that was called a Cimarron. And so they finally decided they don't need as many. Same thing like with Ford. So one important thing that I want you to come back to later on is the General Motors. They had 5, actually they had 6 when they had the Saturn, but they have 5, and now they only have 3. That's by choice. Cars have many models. You know, we've got the compacts, the sedans. Used to have the station wagons. My family had station wagons. We've replaced those with the minivans. We've got the SUVs. We got the electric cars now, but that kind of can be compacts and sedans. They're always coming out. We have trucks, all the different kinds of trucks, and we have these crossover hybrids that are kind of half regular car, half electric car. So we have many different models, but they all do the same thing, but it's based on your needs. If you have a very, very, very small family, you and one other significant other, a smart car is your size of car. But if you have a family with kids, nope, not going to be able to do it in a smart car. You're going to have probably one of those minivans or full-size vans. And just the opposite, if it's only you, you probably don't need one of those big cars anymore, so you can downsize. Linux is the same way. You can have a Linux that just meets your needs. So here is the version with the cars that Linux has many makes. We call these distributions. And a distribution is just an organization that builds all and puts all the parts together for an operating system. And we have one that started out called Slackware, and then there's another offshoot of Slackware called Salix. We got Debian, and an offshoot of Debian is Ubuntu. An offshoot of Ubuntu is Mint. And I'm going to explain all of that in a minute. We have Red Hat and Fedora, which is like a Red Hat, SUSE and Gecko. We have one called Gentoo. And important note to note that Chrome OS, which runs those Chromebooks, is a branch of Linux. Arch is another one, has Manjaro, and Ubuntu had Mint. Just to show you that it was a major player and it's got a added on. So we have all these different distros, but they're all basically a version of Linux. And relating to the models, Linux has what we call desktop environments, and that would be all of the little software that is added to make what you see and do on your desktop comfortable. If you were like me and started back in the 70s and stuff, we started with text-only computers, no graphics, just a typewriter, and we just typed things and things happened back in the old DOS days. We have that is the far extreme, and then we have other ends like this KDE Plasma and the GNOME 3, which are just really full-featured, lots of bells and whistles, and we have everything in between. So these are all the different kinds of desktop environments that you can choose from. One's called XFCE and Mate, Pantheon, Enlightenment. And they all basically do the same thing like those models of car, or the models of the car. It just depends on what is your feeling. So this is where the problem comes in. If we go back, this isn't even all of them. Bob asked, well, how many Linux are there now? Well, I don't have the number because it just keeps going, but I know that our one website, we keep track of the top 100. And so these are just a few of them. So you have a choice of what manufacturer, if we want to call it that, and then you have a choice of what model of desktop. And what's nice nowadays is that you can put about any choice of desktop with any choice of distro that you want. Now, just to show you kind of a timeline, the development, that Linux has been around for a while. In fact, all of the computer operating systems started way back with Unix, way back in the 80s and 70s, but we didn't know much about them because it was mostly in universities and big high-tech places, not in the homes, not in the offices. It was in the background. And then eventually people started figuring out what to do with computers. And as just a kind of a review, Windows 3, before that, we didn't really know much about Windows before the 90s. But Windows 3 came out, then 3.1, and then, of course, in 1995, 95 came out, 98, XP, and I didn't go on beyond that because, of course, we all know that it went from XP to Me, and then to 7, and then to this and that and whatever, and we're now up to Windows 11, which was never supposed to be because 10 was going to be the last Windows that you ever would buy. Liars. Now, on the other side, you can see that Linux goes back into the 90s just as much as Windows does. It officially started out in 93, and we had two different versions of Linux, 94, 99, even in 2001, one that's called Arch came out. But at the same time, as I'm going to get to, there were more than these coming. So whereas on the left-hand side, you've got window, 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 and just with a new build, on the right-hand side, all of these have running versions and builds and offshoots of them. And that's how we have over 100 of them. And so the question comes up always, why are there so many? And I give an easy answer. Why are there so many cars? When we look back in the history, everybody was driving a Model T. Everybody's car looked the same. Everybody's car rode the same. And I wasn't there back then, but I wonder how many times somebody got in a Model T and it wasn't their Model T because they all went the same. So over the years, cars have been built to fit needs. People go and try them out to see which one they like the best. So what we have is what's called open source. And what that is, as I relate to it, is recipes. And the build of a computer operating system has ingredients. I'm not a programmer. I'm not an electrician. I use computers, manage computers, but I build my own computers, but there's a lot of stuff I don't know in deep down. But I do know that there's all of these recipes, the codes that are put together to make it work. If you went to a potluck, which we all have been to, and I'm sure you guys have a lot of good potlucks down there, you go through the line, you find a dish that is just great. Boy, it is fancy. You'd love that. You've got another potluck coming up, family reunion or whatever. So you go up to the person after you find out who made that, and you said, that dish was fantastic. I got to have the recipe. Well, the person says, "Oh, gee, I don't know. It's been in our family, and we've all kind of agreed that we're keeping it in our family. It's something special, so I can't do it." We call that closed source. Nobody knows what's in that recipe because the creators won't allow it. Now they might say, "Hey, I can make it for you. Here's how much the ingredients would cost. You give me the money and I'll make it for you, and then you can go and take it wherever you want." But the problem is with food, if you don't know what's in that dish, you might be making it a problem for somebody who might eat something they're allergic to. So that's always not so good. But you go to somebody else at this potluck and they have a dish, and you go to them and say, "Hey, that was so great. I got to have the recipe." And this person said, "No problem. I got the recipe for so-and-so, and they got the recipe for so-and-so, and they got the recipe here. I even have a copy of it right here because I know people want it and I pass it out." So we call that open source because you know what's exactly in there. So that's the difference between open source and closed source. Linux is total open source. The other good thing about the open source recipe is that as you look through that, if you find something that, cousin so-and-so hadn't ought to eat, you might be able to replace that with something else or just leave it out altogether. Or my wife's the kind of person who says, "Boy, that recipe was good. I wonder how it would be if we added some of this." So you can change it because you know what the recipe is, so you can make it better. Okay, so recipes are a lot like the open source software. And with Linux, all of it's open. Anybody can see all the code that is used to make up this operating system and software that's open source software and all of that. That means that somebody can take the recipe and build it themselves. Now, I haven't done that because I'm not the programmer, but I could build any Linux operating system I wanted if I just got the recipe, the code, and put it together. Or what people do is they say, this was a nice piece of operating software, this Linux, but it would be even better if it could do this. And so somebody just adds that, and we've got a new Linux, a variation of the original Linux. Or somebody said, "I don't like the way it does this, so we're going to change that." And so because of being open source, we have more than 100 different Linuxes that are all basically the same, but they have features that are a little bit different and they work differently. And the same thing goes for software. We have lots of software. When we started out with Windows years ago, Windows says, "Here's what you use." And everybody just opened up Windows, clicked on what was there, and used it, never knowing that there might be others out there. So you never had to make choices with Windows. Now I make choices with my Linux. Just about anything that you would do on a computer, there's choices. I've just started talking about the operating system itself, the desktop itself, but there's variations of software. We must have 6 or 7 at least different file managers, different photo programs, a lot of choices. So that's why there's so many out there. Now, they come and go because some people develop something and they get tired of taking care of it. So they just toss it away and it goes just like my Oldsmobile did. Or somebody says, I just can't maintain this. I can't do it. I'm going to get rid of it. Somebody else says, "Hey, give me the recipe. I'll keep it going." And so sometimes things keep going, but they go passed on to different cooks over the time. So that's why there's so many out there and why we have so many choices. Now, I want to tell you something that you may not have known. The world actually runs on Linux. Just about everything that you do outside of the desktop is run by Linux. And I had a program that I used to do that showed that, and I had pictures that you wouldn't believe. The United States submarine force uses Linux. The shuttle and the space program, they use Linux. The banking system, all of the servers that work in the background is Linux. The big thing we tell everybody is the top 500 supercomputers in the world run on Linux. So Linux runs the world, but Microsoft and Mac OS, they kind of run the desktop. And I'm going to kind of explain that and the why. But you'd be surprised at how much Linux is in your life that you didn't realize. Just about everything. So that's because of it being so secure, because it's free. So businesses, can have it on their servers and stuff. It doesn't cost them, and it runs. But those are the things that you don't see. That's why you don't know that the world runs on Linux, because all you see is the desktops. So why isn't Linux running more, or why is Mac and OS running the desktop? And here are the three reasons why: money, software, and what I call trickle down. Now, remember that I said in the beginning a number of times, Linux is free. I don't pay anything for Linux. However, I can donate if I would like to, but I don't pay anything for Linux. So Linux doesn't have a lot of money coming in for advertisement. Microsoft and Apple get lots of money, which obviously you can think now, if Linux operating system is free, then if I'm buying Windows or Apple, I'm paying for a lot of, well, not the operating system, because Linux is free. All right, so they have a lot of money for advertising. And so people know about that. Money talks. Microsoft kind of worked deals with computer manufacturers. You put my Windows on your computer and I'm going to give you a little cut of the profit. So they do. I do want to say that nowadays there are a number of hardware computer companies that now supply laptops, desktops with Linux on them. Let's talk about the software. The reason that Microsoft runs the desktop goes back to their software, because Microsoft's really a software group. They didn't invent Windows. Windows came from Unix and a branch of those back then. Apple came from Unix, same as Linux, but it was from a different branch that went off and became what's called BSD. And so Linux came straight from Unix, and Apple came from BSD, which came from Unix, and same with Microsoft. So they're all kind of related to each other. But Microsoft's big thing was that they did software. And what they did was they cornered the market on Office software products. And there was a big battle. If you were in the office years ago, the big name was WordPerfect. But Microsoft, with all their money, went after it and won the battle, and was able to convince, I don't know whether they did it through money deals or whatever, they got almost all the offices in our country to adopt Microsoft Office as their main software. And so then that became what was on the computers that were being sold. In terms of home use, we saw what the office was using, so we figured we needed to do that. So that's our trickle down. it happened in education, the same thing. The business world was using Windows and specifically Office. So the universities say, oh, we need to prepare our students to be masters of Microsoft Office because that's what they're going to be using in the world. Colleges then became followers of this trickle down. Then high schools said, oh, here's what the colleges are using. We need to make sure our high school kids can handle college, then therefore college kids can handle the business world. So it trickled down that way. And that's why, Microsoft became so big and covered everything. But again, at the same time, all of the background computers, servers and stuff was being run by Linux. So we have all of that there. Now, basically, Microsoft went with the Office people. Apple kind of went with the graphics people. And then Linux ran the background, but nobody knows it. Now you do. So I want to show you a couple of screenshots and see if you recognize these screenshots. I'm sure you will. There's one. There's another one. And here's a chance for audience participation. And those were screenshots of, and I can't hear you from way back there, so somebody can holler that out. Windows. All right, Windows. How about these? Do you recognize these? How about those? Not as recognizable as the first set because it's the new one. So what was that one?
11. Windows 11.
Right. Yeah. And that's partly why some of you are here, because you got computers that have been running Windows 10, and I have a desktop right back here that says you can't run Windows 11. Now, actually I could, because all I have to do is flip a security switch in the BIOS and it will do it, but it's not smart enough to know that that's all I need to do. But I have chosen not to do that. I have APCG issued me a laptop that's got 11 on it so I can see what's going on. So the problem is you've got these computers that are working fine for you, and all of a sudden you're being told by Microsoft, you can't go to our new version of Windows. Your computer can't handle it. You have to go out and buy a new one. And you're going, I don't really want to buy a new one. This one's working fine. I don't have the money because some of these new computers are costing a lot. So you're here to hear that there is a solution for you. Oh, and by the way, guess what? That wasn't Windows 10 and Windows 11 that you were seeing. Those were two different versions of Linux. Because of customization, it is made to look exactly like it. So, that's helpful for somebody who's been a big Windows 10 user. Switching to that Linux makes it a little bit easy because, oh, it looks so familiar. Because really, in the background, Linux is no different than Windows, and you're going to see that when we play around with mine. So that's kind of the joke, is that there was two what looked like Windows computers, but they're not Windows, they were Linux. So now we're going to dive in for our live demo, because I think that's what you really want to be able to see and know. I do want to also mention, in addition to when I showed you that the Chrome operating system was a Gen 2 based, and I don't do Gen 2. That's kind of a little bit of a harder Linux than I do. But there are people who that's what they like. The Chromebook is another good alternative if you need something new. if your computer totally dies and you can't do anything with it, you might be interested in the Chromebook if you are the type of person that goes on the internet, checks your email, reads the news, watches some YouTube, may type up something or other on either Google Docs or Microsoft Web, and you mostly do what we consider internet connected activities. Chromebook is great for you because you're doing everything through the browser, the Chrome browser. Now, personally, I don't like to be tied into Google that much because you have to use everything Google. But on the other side, I'm not the expert. You've got one in Florida up at, near Sarasota with Huey Poplock, that if the Chromebook gets messed up, I don't know if you guys have anybody that helps work on computers for you guys when they get messed up, but with the Chromebook, if it gets messed up, I've been told all you have to do is go and click on one button and it reboots itself into a brand new, and everything that you have is back the way it's supposed to be because you've signed into Google. All your stuff is there. It can't really get hurt much. The only downside is that you're limited to whatever programs can be installed through the internet. But a lot of people, that's all they do. So the Chromebooks are good. I also want to make mention on another side that all of you people that have Android phones, those are Linux phones, technically. That Android operating system came based off of Linux. So Linux runs the smartphone, because I think over the world, there's more Android smartphones than there are iPhones, even though there are more ads for, I think, the other. So Linux has been around you quite a while. So let's end this part here. And I'm going to take you back and make sure you can see it right. This is my actual desktop on my laptop. My make of Linux, the distribution that I am using is called Linux Mint. It got its history from Ubuntu, which is a major player in the Linux world, who got its beginnings from the original Debian, the very second one that was built back in '93. And there's a lot of choices, and it's just like with cars. I do so much of comparing Linux to cars because why do you drive this make of car and not that one? You have a preference. There's a reason. Why do you drive this model of a car? And for me, a model of a car is one that I can get in and out without banging my head on the roof. Other people, I want a car that sits low to the ground. I want a car that is big and roomy. I got a car that, we have our choices. So I've made my choice of Linux Mint, which is one of the very popular ones. It's easy to use for beginners. There's a number of them that I'll try to remember to mention. My second choice, or sometimes I consider it the first choice, the desktop is what I do a lot with. So that's kind of more important to me than what's on the inside. My desktop choice is called Mate, M-A-T-E. And there's a lot of argument about how to spell it or how to pronounce it. A lot of people think it's mate, but it's mate. It's a South American drink or something. So, the people who know say it's mate, not mate. Anyway, so those are the two. And as we look at my desktop, you're going to see things, well, that looks a little bit different. And it's my choice. In the Windows world, for so long, the taskbar always sat at the bottom of the screen. And it was probably years before you might have learned that you can move it to any side of the computer, top, bottom, left, or right. And it was the people who were doing like photo editing who needed to have a lot of room top to bottom discovered that and said, this is great because I've got a widescreen monitor now, but I need space top to bottom. So I put my taskbar on the side, left or right, and now I have all the area between the top and the bottom to be working. Now, my choice is, I back in my Windows days, I put my taskbar at the top because that was the one that was easier to see with my older eyes. And I also am a retired teacher. I taught first grade for 25 years, then middle school computer for 10. And we always talk about top to bottom. So I like to have my toolbar at the top because sometimes if it's at the bottom, your bifocals and no lines, it messes up. One of the things you can't do in Windows is I have a second toolbar. And I can have 4 toolbars if I wanted to, one around each. I might even be able to have 2 toolbars right beside each other because in Linux, you might have that choice. Now, I use 2 because at the top, I have some important ones. These would be the ones that we always see traditionally in the bottom. There's my clock, my calendar, there's my weather. And there are some active programs. Of course, the icon for my volume, my internet. There's my microphone when it's working. This laptop can hook up to Bluetooth, so there's an option for that. Then I also have what programs are actually running are up here at the top. Now, what I've chosen on my side is that I have all of my shortcut favorite icons. And so those are on the side and they're on the right side and only for the reason it is, I'm a left-handed person, but I do mouse right-handed. And so for me, having all of my icons on the right side just makes it normal that I don't have to cross to the other side, but I could have had them over there. And as you see, I've just included some of the most popular tools that I use. I have a music program. It's called Pandora Radio, but it's a software. It's called Pithos to connect to Pandora. I've got a virtual box. There's my icon to start up LibreOffice, which is what I do. It's the worldwide standard for Office when people don't do Microsoft Office. I have my remote access. I've got a snipping program like you have. Then I have my workspaces. What's interesting is Linux has had workspaces for years, and Microsoft finally in 10 came up with adding workspaces, which are great because you can have things like right now I can be on one workspace and have something else going on in another workspace. I can choose. And then, you know, these are just my choice. There's my menu and my control panels or control settings link. Oh, I got a neat program right here with the jagged. If I have a program that won't close, I have a program that I can click on it and say, shut that program down. I don't even have to go to the task manager and say, stop that process. But I can put anything on here that I want and customize it. Now, I also have been more of a power user in that I'm a big keyboard person. And so I can open up and start things without an icon on here. You'll notice that there are no browser buttons on here. I always start my browsers from the keyboard. There's no file manager icon that has been very common because all I do is I hit my what's called a super key and F for file, and it opens up. I don't even have to use my mouse. That takes time. We'll come back to that. So that's why I don't have a lot of icons on there because I can do keyboard. Now, These are all exactly the same things that I did in Windows, except the double taskbar. I had shortcuts on icons. I had keyboard shortcuts. Nothing different. Now, when we talk about some of the software, and this is another thing, I use pretty much a lot of the same software that Windows people use, and I did back then. If back here, I'm getting out of here. Oh, I closed it already. Let's go back to. If I go Control Alt, I'm using Brave, which is also usable on Windows. I can use, it's coming up. I'm on with being on a laptop on Zoom. Sometimes keyboards start slow. Here is Google, but it's actually Chromium, not Chrome. Chromium is the open source version of Google's Chrome. Chrome, it's locked down, that's closed source. You don't know what's going on inside of it. So I do browsers no different than I would on a Windows computer. My Office is LibreOffice, and I have a word processing program just like the Windows people who use Word. I also have a spreadsheet, and tonight's presentation was made with the version that's called Impress. So I have everything that I could have used available to me. Let's go into Start menu. Here's another thing. With Windows, you have one Start menu. And we saw the one that's the new one for 11. We saw the one for 10. We remember the one for 7. But in Linux, people have different ideas of how a Start menu should be. So think about your Windows 7 or your Windows 10, and what this Mate one, they said, we got to locate all of your places right here quickly. So I've got access to the computer, which is the C drive in a sense for Windows. My home folder, which would have been my user, get to the desktop and trash. I have my quick links to my system access. Mostly all we had in Windows was the control center, or settings as it's called now, control panel in the old days. But I also have access to my software manager, a package manager, which is a little bit more in depth, but software is all that we need. And then my locking out stuff. I have applications, and what they're doing that I always liked and never liked in Windows is they're in categories. And so I can go to a category and there's all the software that has anything to do with internet or Office, graphics. In Windows, it's all alphabetical. And a lot of times, you know what kind of process or activity you want to do, but you have no idea of what program will do that. So all I have to do is come here to categories, and then it's all there. Also, in Windows, we used to have a little bit of favorites that we could put up. If I chose to have my favorites be what I see every time I pop up, I can put a whole bunch of favorites on there. Now, I'm not sure that we can put as many as I could do in Windows 10 Because when I taught class, I showed them, if you make your icons really small and you add it bigger, I said, you can get about 100 icons on here. But I said, you be honest, how often would you use the programs from 70 to 100 or even 50 to 100? But you can put right now, you can see I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and I think I can go 14, 16 different favorites right here. But again, I do mine with keyboards. I've got keyboard shortcuts set up. So that'll pop up my browser. It'll pop up terminal. We're not going to talk about that unless somebody brings it up. My email program, it's on a keyboard shortcut, and my music player is right out there. So this is one person's or one team's idea of saying, let's have a different style of a menu, not be stuck with whatever comes with your distro. So you can change that. Same thing would happen with your file manager. This would be the equivalent of Internet or File Explorer in the old days. Now it's called File Manager, like everybody else calls it. And this particular one has a name, Caja, C-A-J-A. And I've had somebody who really kind of has been on my case about all these different choices. Well, that's the thing. We have choices. We can't all call them the same file manager. We wouldn't know which one. We have one file manager that was one of the big popular ones. It's called Nautilus. And if you remember from our story days when we were young, that came from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. The ship was called Nautilus. Somebody said, well, that Nautilus file manager is pretty good, but I think I can make a better one. And so the Cinnamon desktop people created a variation of Nautilus, called it Nemo, because Nemo was the captain of Nautilus. So in Linux, we have a lot of that kind of fun things going around with the naming and how they're similar and stuff like that. If we look, just to show you that in Linux, we have settings or control just like everything else. I have all of the controls like we had before, grouped into administrative things, hardware, excuse me, internet look and feel. Those are all my personalization options and stuff about me. So, we have a complete access to customizing our computer as crazy as we want to. So operating system, it works just like a computer. I create files, save files, put them in locations, open them up. I use the software to do all of that. You've seen some of that. I can go to the internet. I can have access to that. I can, if I chose, I could access Google Docs because it's all on their Google Drive up there. I can access Microsoft's web version. I'm not able to do 365 yet. They're working on that. Finally, Microsoft says, we got a lot of people that are using Linux now, but they're not using Microsoft. Maybe we better write one that'll work on Linux. But a lot of the Linux people are going to say, why do I want to pay for that when I've got LibreOffice and does all the same things? Now, I will mention that one program that people always say, well, there's a problem with Linux. It can't run Adobe Photoshop. Well, I have to tell you that in my computer club, there might be one, maybe two people out of almost 170 some that might even think about using Photoshop. That's more of a professional, somebody who's a photo person. So Adobe says, well, we're not going to take the time to write one that works for Linux because Linux has other programs that do photo editing. So why are they going to spend time to buy ours? It's hazy in Newark tonight, 84. So what I want to do is kind kind of give a chance for anybody there, and maybe Bob will have to relay questions to what do you want to see? What do you want to know about Linux that I haven't shown you and told you about? Because if I just had you sit down with a very uncustomized version, I don't think you'd have any problems, because you'd probably go down to the bottom left-hand corner and get the start menu and find your programs and start them up and run them. If you already know how to use a browser, you got no problems with the internet. If you know how to do word processing, well, then you know how to do LibreOffice Writer. So what else does people have for questions, or what do you want to see? Because I want you to see that basically I don't even think I'm running Linux when I'm running it. I'm just running a computer.
John,
It does.
Yeah. Could you bring up the store, please?
The store, sure. Software manager. Now, in Linux, each distribution has a warehouse full of software that's been specifically designed for your distro. Then there is a second warehouse that is software that's been designed for your family of software. I'm a part of the Debian family. Then there's another warehouse that says these are softwares that can run on Linux, but might not run perfect on yours because it's just made for Linux and there's so many of them. But this is our software store, and everything's in categories, and we have tons. I'm going to bring up the other one because I just got to show you that the package manager is a little bit more. Note anything that has to have administrative approval has to have password, just like in Windows. And wait when it reads it, then I'll come back. Yep. We know that. I want you to notice down here at the bottom, there are 72,616 packages. Now that doesn't mean software. Some software has multiple packages, but this just gives you an idea of how much software is available, and it's all for free. So this is the simple one. You just come to here, and of course they will recommend stuff for you, but I can come down to any of these categories, and we'll go to internet, and it'd be nice to tell me numbers. But as you see, if I scroll through, these are all programs that does something to do with internet. And of course, at the top, you see the browsers, Firefox and Chromium, and my Thunderbird from Mail. I can specifically switch to just subcategories. And all I have to do is just say, well, let's see, I want this FileZilla is a file transfer program. The old days when we all used FTP maybe, and it tells you about it. And then all I have to do is hit install. There's no difficulty. Now, I will mention, just as a quick side, there is a thing called the terminal. It's what we used to do way back in the DOS days when we didn't have a graphical interface. And there are some little, I don't want to say it's tricky, some procedures that you learn to do the old-fashioned way. But in Linux, you don't have to ever go there. There's the button, I install. If it's something that I have installed, like the Firefox, I come here and there's the button to remove it. So simple. Up at the top, you can see that I have, well, this is kind of, yeah, my toolbar. There's a little shield with the button, and there's my update manager, just like we have in Windows. The only difference is I have more control over the updates here. Nothing gets updated unless I say so. Whereas in Windows, Microsoft has now said, we are going to update certain things and you don't have a choice. With Linux, I have all that choice. All right, did that kind of show you in the software what you were wanting to see?
Yeah, thank you. Wait a minute, let's see if we got any questions.
Yeah, and John, Can a Linux machine participate in a Windows network? In the same
A Windows machine definitely works with a Linux. The problem is that Linux file system, the most common one is ext4. Windows is programmed not to read it. So if I have a computer that's dual booting Windows and Linux, Linux sees everything on the Windows side. But if I go to Windows, it just sees an empty hard drive. I think they're making changes now since Microsoft is now getting into using Linux. That's that new thing that I haven't even wanted to try to learn in the command line or the shell in Windows. But that was the problem. Windows couldn't read ext4. Maybe it was by design. So no, they didn't work well. But through the command line, there's ways that they can talk, but we don't do that. But I know that when I was the tech coordinator at our middle school, and we had Windows computers, but we ran a Linux server. After I left, they switched it to a Windows server because the people there, I don't know, I don't follow like Linux, but Linux runs the world, folks. There's games. So I didn't mention the games, but you've got games on here, and you can watch videos. I can edit videos. I can edit pictures. And the big thing is that if you have an older computer, we have a version of Linux that will work on your computer. Linux can go back to computers that are the 32-bit. Windows now has said you got to have a 64-bit or you don't run it. You still have an old 32-bit, we can do it.
John, I got another question for you.
Sure.
Ron, this is Jim Fry. I have a question. I just bought a brand new Lenovo Windows 11 machine. Can you run a Linux program on a Windows 11 machine?
Can you run a Linux program on a Windows 11 machine?
A Linux program or Linux on that machine?
Yeah, can I run the operating system of Linux on my new machine?
Yes. I don't do that anymore. I have a Lenovo laptop. This one that is right now is an older one. I used to dual boot. What you do is you just shrink the part of the hard drive that Windows took over to make room to put Linux on. And then when Linux installs, it says, hey, there's a Windows operating system. So when the computer boots up, the Linux boot program says, hey, do you want to do Linux today or do you want to do Windows? And you click and choose which one, and they work. The only problem we're finding out is sometimes when Windows do their updates, they kind of mess up the booting program. Then all of a sudden you can't get in. But yes, you can do it. I just brought home a refurbished laptop from our club. It's an old HP that has the swivel top. It's dual booting. It has both Windows and Linux. It's got 10 on there. But yeah, you can do that.
Got another question for you.
Okay.
Do you need an antivirus program for Linux? What makes it so secure?
Oh, good. No, I don't run it. If you would go into my list of programs, you probably would not find it. I do say that we have virus programs because I would, if you gave me a thumb drive, or if you gave me a CD, a hard drive, an external hard drive, and I was going to be the middleman and pass it on to somebody else, I probably, because it came from you, scan it so that it didn't have anything that I was passing on. The reason that the Linux is so secure is that in Linux, nothing can happen to your computer without your permission. Now, in the Windows world, the first user on a Windows machine has to be the administrator. And that's all it was for years. I had to really work hard to convince people that you need to make a second user that's a standard user. Back in Windows XP, it was called a limited user. Nobody wanted to be limited. When you run as an administrator, the computer is completely open to every room on your computer. Every file, every folder, every access is open all of the time. So if you accidentally let something in while you're running as an administrator, man, it just can go crazy. When you're running as a standard user, which is what I've taught, and now Microsoft has started pushing for that. A standard user can do anything except install programs, remove programs, add users, remove users, and change settings that affect the whole computer and all users. With Linux, you log in, you have administrative rights, but you lose them right after you log in. Because right now, I'm not an administrator. I am a standard user. But as you saw, when I needed to do something like the software, if I would go up here and say, I want to install, it says, you have to have administrative approval. So I would have to put my administrative password in. Once I did that and it did whatever it did, I get demoted back to a standard user. And if something happens, nothing can happen in my computer unless I authorize it by giving the password. So that is what makes Linux so secure, is that you can't, in Windows, you've got exe files that can automatically run. In Linux, that can't happen. Nothing can run without administrative. So if something happens on a Linux computer, some human let it happen. And that's the biggest thing. You know, the biggest thing we hear is when there's password breaches and server gets hacked and whatever, it's usually because a human did not do what they were supposed to in terms of updating software, not taking the thumb drive that has all the passwords out of the building and drop it on the floor where somebody picked it up. But that's why Linux is so secure. Now, granted, things happen, but it's mostly after the servers, because that would have the most impact. I have been using Linux for, oh my goodness. I retired in 2008. I started using it back then. So, you know, in the middle of the early 2000s. And I don't think I have gotten any kind of a virus. And the only things that happen to my computer is when I do something stupid trying to, oh, I wonder if I can do this. And I crash my own computer. But I haven't run a virus on this computer. I have one to demonstrate, to show people, well, if you gave me a thumb drive, I probably would scan the thumb drive, but I don't have it running on my computer.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, wait a minute. One more question.
Sure.
How do you go about getting this Linux?
How do you go about getting Linux?
Perfect. Good answer. No, that's the question. I'm going to give you the answer. Let me get, Linux is free. You go out on the internet. It used to be, we had magazines. Do you guys remember magazines? Who gets magazines now? We had computer magazines that would include the Linux disk, and you'd buy the magazine and there you had the disk to install. But if we go, I wanted to show you, we have a website called Distro Watch. And I wanted to show you because since Bob asked that. And this website is great because this has all the information about different Linux reviews, links to them. And as you can see down on here, here is our listing of the most looked at. I don't want to say that MX Linux, I use it and I like it. It's not really the number one, but it's the one that most people are looking at. But if you watch this, we will scroll all the way down to 100, and we have a waiting list. We have new versions of Linux that come up, and people are on the waiting list to jump over to take over the number 100's place of the 99. So anyway, so let's say you want the Mint. I would come here, and this will take me to their review page, tells you about it. And there's an actual linuxmint.com. And here's the great thing that I tell people, Linux, oh, did I tell you it's free? You can go and test drive any Linux you want at no cost. And the easiest way to do it is that you download a Linux and convert it to a thumb drive. And then you boot to that thumb drive. You go through your boot menu and say, don't boot to my hard drive, boot to the thumb drive. And you can actually run Linux off of a thumb drive. We do it all the time when we're demonstrating it. So anyway, so you would just come to a place like Linux Mint, and you would say, I want to do a download. And then they would say, okay, we've got 3 different versions. That's the cinnamon one. That's the Mate I do. And the XFCE, which is the lightest weighted one, and it's really customizable. And then you would download it. And it's downloaded as a file, not quite the same as a Windows, because Windows has to be installed. It can't run from a thumb drive because you got to pay for it. But with Linux, you can convert it to a thumb drive. In the old days, we burned them to a CD. And then you would pop the CD in, and you could run it. So you can try out Linux without even doing anything to your computer. And it runs great. You can even save files to your computer because remember, Linux reads Windows. So I did that when I was at school. My machine at school was a Windows machine, but at home I had a Linux. So I would create a file at school, save it to a thumb drive, come home, plug it into my Linux machine, open up the file and work on it because files are cross-platform. So that's what you do. You know, you just get a download an ISO or ISO file, and then there's an easy way, couple of easy programs on your computer to convert it or put it onto a thumb drive that makes it bootable. And then you can try it. And it only takes, nowadays it's going to get hard to find like 16 gig hard drives because that's considered small. But I have a bunch of those, and I have a different Linux on each. So I can just pop it into a computer, boot up to it, and try out a Linux. So yeah, Distro Watch is the best place because you can find the links to all of the websites, read about it, and try it out.
Any other questions? Nope. I guess that's it.
Yeah, and the background that I wanted to have today, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. The background that I was wanting to have is a Linux one that says "Don't fear the penguin," but my laptop, my nice Lenovo laptop, my i5 doesn't have the processor for Zoom to run background, so I had to put up a different one. But I have one that says "Don't fear the penguin," because it's out there, it's good. It has software, its operating system is secure, it's easy to use. We've got a version called Linux Lite. We've got one called Zorin. You saw the two that even look like Windows 10 and 11. And we have a number of, I don't want to say beginner ones. We have a number that are very comfortable, easy to use. And then we have some that are for the more experienced that use heavy duty work. We have a Linux workshop, usually the third Wednesday on our APCUG, talk all about Linux. We have a year's worth of videos on APCUG's YouTube page, all dedicated to just Linux. So the information's out there if you'd like to get into it. And like I said, put it on a thumb drive, try it on your old computer and see how new life it has, because it doesn't bog it down.
All right.
So, thank you very much, John. Thank you very
Well,
much for. an
our
interesting
pleasure.
and informative presentation.
And I appreciate all of you giving up the concert. I'm a musician person and I know how good concerts are, and I appreciate you coming and learning about this. Now share. Bob will get the video recording if it worked right. And then he'll have it for all those people that didn't get to hear about this.
I think you
Thanks.
made a few converts here.